Section 11. Changed circumstances when a loan estimate can be revised. Everything was fine until the inspection. Emily and Carlos are now under contract on the Gilbert home, and their financing appears to be moving forward. Then the inspection happens. The inspector identifies an aging HVAC system and evidence of an older roof repair. Emily and Carlos still want the property, but they're concerned about the potential expenses. Sarah negotiates with the listing agent. After several conversations, the parties agree that the seller will provide an additional credit toward Emily and Carlos's allowable closing costs instead of completing one of the requested repairs. Carlos is thrilled. Perfect. Just change the contract and we're done. Not quite. Sarah has changed something in the real estate transaction. That change may also need to travel through the mortgage transaction. Welcome to changed circumstances. A revised estimate isn't a do-over button. Remember what we learned about tolerances. TRID generally requires the creditor to provide estimates in good faith. If certain costs later increase, the lender cannot simply say, well, our first estimate wasn't very good. Let's send another one. A revised loan estimate isn't supposed to be a free do-over every time someone underestimates a cost. Regulation Z identifies specific circumstances in which revised estimates may be used for purposes of determining good faith compliance. That's an important consumer protection. Otherwise, tolerance limitations would mean very little. So what is a changed circumstance? Let's look at the practical idea. A changed circumstance may involve an event beyond the control of the applicable parties. Information specific to the consumer or transaction that was relied upon in providing the loan estimate and later changes or turns out to be inaccurate, or new information specific to the consumer or transaction that the creditor did not rely upon when the original disclosure was provided. That's a lot of regulatory language. Let's make it real. Imagine a settlement service charge was estimated based on information that reasonably appeared accurate when the loan estimate was prepared. Later, new information about the property or transaction changes the service that is required. That may matter. The important lesson is that something legitimate changed. The lender doesn't simply get to say, we want to charge more. When the buyer's eligibility changes, changed circumstances can also involve the consumer's eligibility for the loan terms previously disclosed. Suppose Carlos's employment situation changes during the transaction. Or imagine new information affects the borrower's creditworthiness or the property used as security for the mortgage. Could that affect financing? Sarah shouldn't determine whether the event legally permits a revised loan estimate. But she should understand why Jason suddenly says, we need to reevaluate the loan. Here's where agents get into trouble. Carlos tells Sarah about a major financial change, and Sarah says, don't tell the lender, we're almost closed. Never do that. Information affecting the buyer's ability to qualify for financing belongs with the lender. Trying to hide a material financing issue is not protecting the transaction. It's creating a bigger problem. What if Emily requests the change? Now let's change the scenario. Emily calls Jason and says, we've decided we want a different loan structure. That's a consumer-requested change. Regulation Z recognizes consumer-requested revisions as one circumstance that can permit revised estimates. This makes sense. If Emily changes what she's asking the lender to provide, the original estimate may no longer accurately describe the transaction. The same practical concern can arise when changes to the real estate contract affect information used in the financing process. This is why Sarah shouldn't assume that an amendment to the purchase contract exists only in the real estate file. The lender may need it, escrow may need it, title may need it. Communication matters. The appraisal surprise. Let's give Emily and Carlos another problem. Their contract price is $500,000. The appraisal comes in at $485,000. Now everybody starts talking. Will the seller reduce the price? Will Emily and Carlos bring additional money? Will the parties negotiate somewhere in between? Does the contract provide a way for the buyers to address the appraisal issue? Those are real estate and contractual questions. But whatever the parties decide may also affect financing. Suppose the seller agrees to reduce the purchase price. That's great, but Jason needs the amendment. Why? Because the lender shouldn't continue preparing mortgage disclosures based on an outdated purchase price. Interest rates can create their own changes. Some loan estimate charges depend on the interest rate. If the interest rate wasn't locked when the original loan estimate was issued and is later locked, Regulation Z provides rules that may permit revision of interest rate dependent charges. Again, Sarah doesn't calculate the revised disclosure, but she should understand why Emily might receive updated figures after a rate lock event. When Emily says, "Why did Jason send me another document?" Sarah shouldn't automatically panic. She should ask what changed. Loan estimates don't stay open forever. Timing matters here too. A loan estimate doesn't necessarily remain available indefinitely while a consumer decides whether to proceed. Regulation Z recognizes circumstances involving the consumer's failure to indicate an intent to proceed within the applicable period after the loan estimate is provided. If the consumer waits too long and later decides to proceed, revised estimates may become relevant. That's another reason buyers should actually read their disclosures when they receive them. Ignoring the loan estimate can have consequences. Revised loan estimates have timing rules too. Here's another mistake agents make. They hear that a changed circumstance occurred and assume the lender can revise the loan estimate whenever it wants. Not so fast. Regulation Z contains timing requirements for revised disclosures. Generally, when a creditor uses a revised loan estimate based on an applicable permitted circumstance, it must provide the revised disclosure within the regulatory timeframe after receiving information sufficient to establish the reason for the revision. There are also restrictions as the transaction gets close to consummation. We will continue developing those timing concepts as we move toward the closing disclosure. For Sarah, the practical lesson is simple. Don't sit on transaction changes. The amendment sitting in Sarah's inbox. Imagine Sarah negotiates a seller credit on Monday. Everyone signs the amendment. Sarah saves it in her transaction management system, but forgets to send it to Jason. Thursday afternoon, Jason learns about the credit from escrow. Now, Jason has been working with outdated information for 3 days. That's avoidable. When the contract changes, Sarah should follow her brokerage procedures and make sure the appropriate parties receive the executed change promptly. Broker tip: changes need to travel. A contract change that stays in your file hasn't finished its job. When something changes, ask, who needs this? The buyer, seller, lender, escrow, title, broker, another professional? Sarah doesn't determine whether every change creates a revised loan estimate. She makes sure the professionals who need the information actually receive it. Emily and Carlos have now experienced their first significant change after receiving the loan estimate. But there's a timing problem we haven't discussed. If Jason is permitted to issue a revised loan estimate, how quickly does he have to do it? And how late in the transaction can that revised loan estimate arrive? That's where we're going next. Online discussion. 1. Sarah negotiates an additional seller credit after the inspection. Why should the executed amendment be provided promptly to the lender? Answer: the lender may be relying on the existing purchase contract terms when preparing financing disclosures and underwriting the transaction. A seller credit or other contract modification may affect the information used in the mortgage process. Sarah should not determine whether the change legally requires a revised loan estimate, but she should promptly provide the executed amendment to the appropriate parties so the lender can determine the financing consequences. 2. Carlos tells Sarah that his employment situation changed, but asks her not to tell the lender because they are close to closing. What should Sarah do? Sarah should not participate in concealing information that may affect the buyer's financing eligibility. Carlos should promptly communicate the change to his lender, so the lender can determine its effect on underwriting and the loan. Sarah should also follow brokerage procedures and involve her broker when appropriate, because a financing problem may affect the buyer's contractual performance. 3. Why can't a creditor simply issue a revised loan estimate every time its original estimate turns out to be too low? Answer: TRID's good faith and tolerance requirements would provide little consumer protection if creditors could freely reset estimates whenever costs increased. Regulation Z identifies specific circumstances in which revised estimates may be used for determining good faith compliance. A legitimate permitted reason for revision is therefore important when a creditor seeks to reset applicable estimates.